Good afternoon to you. 4:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Colin Anderson will be with us. He's a staff writer for the Washington Free Beacon. We'll talk about Biden's so-called energy-efficient military plans and how they're not so energy efficient, it turns out. And then Senator Ron Johnson is with us from Wisconsin, as yet another witness steps forward to say the Biden crime family is absolutely a real thing, and he saw it firsthand. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Number of calls coming in. Let me take Sam in Alexandria, line 5. Sam, good afternoon. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello.
Hey, Vince. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Sam. What's on your mind?
Outstanding. Well, I just got back from Britain about 3-4 weeks ago, and one thing that amazed me today as I was watching the news and seeing our beloved president and the king march the line of troops.
Yes.
That they reminded me of the two old gentlemen that sat above the balcony in the Muppet Show.
Statler and Waldorf.
Their big bushy eyebrows and the grumpy look on their face,
yes.
Both of them, especially our beloved president.
Uh-huh.
But going on the climate thing, which I know both of them are big on, and John Kerry, what really torques me as a former Army guy, kind of going into your story about the Army bases, is that these people are not leaders. Leaders lead by example, and that is so far from the way that they are living their lives or will ever live their lives, to include private planes, the houses that they live in, and every aspect of their life. They don't know our lives. They don't know what we do.
No.
And they don't have any appreciation for when they start cutting back on these, energy and things of that nature, what the impact on we, the people, is, because they don't care.
No, and it is crushing to the average person. If the average person is told, we're going to take away your gas stove, that's a big deal in their life. If the average person is told, we're going to take away your internal combustion engine, that's a massive deal. If the average person is told they're not allowed to use power at certain times of day because it's too much energy being drawn from the grid because we're not generating enough energy because we've abandoned fossil fuels, that really wears on a person. It destroys the human spirit. It takes away human flourishing, and people's lives are on the line. And these guys will never be subjected to it, will they, Sam? They will never be in a situation where they are wanting for any of this. They'll still be able to travel at a moment's notice as far as they want. Meanwhile, you will be pinned to your high-rise apartment and won't have anywhere to go.
Absolutely. And the other part that kind of really pushes the knife in it to me is I look at humanity and I look at our worth and our place when it comes into the big picture with respect to God and creation, and that we think that we have all-knowing and all-power to change the climate. And when I think about that and what they say the task before us, I'm a child of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I can remember the National Geographic magazines that, the upcoming ice age and the news reports, and they went by the wayside. And I just have a lot of issue with we as humans thinking that we can change God's creation, that we have gotten to that point. I don't think so. Yeah,
there's a lot that's wrapped up in this topic. One is, why would we trust these leaders to prognosticate about our future when they're so wrong about literally everything, and especially on the issue of the climate.
Thank you very much.
Especially on the issue of the climate, as you just pointed out. How routinely have they gotten this wrong? I mean, the whole concept of the population bomb, and Paul Ehrlich telling us that, well, we were just going to have too many people, and by the turn of the century, you'll have entire countries collapsing because there's too many people, and that just wasn't the case. It was a lie. Well, it always was a lie. It induced a panic. China was aborting children at a record rate. There is so much craziness that has been induced out of these false prophets. And it's enough.
We do know, we do know that if you put too many people on an island like Okinawa, that it will in fact tip over. So at least we have that going for us.
Good old Hank Johnson. But they sound like Hank Johnson. They don't sound quite as dumb because they're a little bit more refined in how they deliver it. But in reality, a lot of it is like that. Oh, well, too many people stand on the island. It's going to flip over. You're a moron. You're a moron, and you shouldn't be anywhere near the levers of power.
At the end of the day, I look at this as a big hand sweep, big picture, free meal ticket, free notoriety, because I hold on to this, and people will give me and invite me places, and I am with that crowd. That's what's important to them, and that's why Al Gore keeps doing it. That's why John Kerry keeps doing it. Do they believe it? Yeah, they probably have a little inkling because they bought their own story. Yes.
No question. Well, thank you, Sam. Yeah. I really appreciate the call today. Insightful as always. Thank you, sir. It's just amazing. And so now, you know what they're transitioning into, these left-wing lunatics? The climate cultists? They've chosen a new target. Your vehicle's tires. Your car tires. Now, you've heard them talk about car tires before. Oh, tires are really dangerous. Don't burn a tire. It's going to hurt the environment. Okay. All right, so you probably shouldn't burn a tire in your yard, unless you want to tick off your lefty neighbor. Then maybe it's justified. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe the juice is worth the squeeze. But there's a piece today in the Washington Post why tires, not tailpipes, are spewing more pollution from your cars. All right, so remember the framework that we were given before. That it was the internal combustion engine that's destroying the planet. It's not John Kerry flying around in his private jet, although, of course, that puts out untold amounts of carbon, is what they say. Untold amounts. But John Kerry, it's worth it because, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. John Kerry is saving the planet. What are you doing? You're just driving around in your fancy SUV, belching out carbon all over the place, just wreaking havoc on the planet. You are no John Kerry. You are no saint. You don't get to do that anymore. And so they want to ban the internal combustion engine. They want to accelerate us into electric vehicles. But how is that possible if it's your tires that are causing all the pollution? This is what the Washington Post says today. And notice, by the way, the internal combustion engine vehicle, not the only vehicle that needs tires. You ever see a Tesla? What are those four things touching the road? Those would be tires. Those are tires. Quote, it's time for a summer road trip for you, your car, and your tires and brakes. Recently, scientists are finding wear and tear on your tires and brakes are causing a worrying amount of particulate pollution, says the Washington Post with a straight face, which may be a problem for the environment and your health. For decades, scientists and health officials have warned drivers of the harmful pollutants coming from tailpipes. But as car exhaust systems have become cleaner, and yes, that's true. Have you noticed what over the course of your life, have you noticed that you can't smell cars like you used to standing next to a busy roadway? Do you remember what it was like 20, 30 years ago standing next to a roadway? You could smell the traffic going by. It's not as much anymore. It's a huge difference. Exhaust pipes have changed a lot. That's thanks to catalytic converters. That's how much the tailpipes are serving up some clean juice, in other words. You see a little water drip down, but for the most part, you're not smelling it all anymore. That's changed a lot, and that's been for the better. That's pollution you can quantify. If fewer people have asthma in your town, win. That's a win. That's a win. Mexico City was like this for a time, where we were moving all this manufacturing south of our border. It goes to Mexico City. The city's filled with smog and smoke, and everybody's getting asthma. Why? Because of the obvious pollution. This is the measurable, realistic stuff. You ask these people, how many degrees are you going to slow the Earth's temperature increase through banning my vehicle? They have no answer for you. They don't have any plans. They have no projections like that. They just say you need to get rid of it. It's important. Do it now. But now this Washington Post piece is positing, it's not actually your tailpipe that's causing all the problems. It's your tires. It's your brakes. Your brakes and tires are causing so much pollution, you shouldn't drive at all. In fact, they write, wear and tear on tires and brakes have been shown to produce increasingly more particle pollution by mass than car exhaust systems did in several real-world and test scenarios. Some of the particles are large enough to see with our eyes, they say. How often do particles the size that you can see with your eyes fly off of a tire? I mean, other than, when trucks reach the end of their the usable life of a tire. I'm talking about, like, you're driving your sedan down the road. Do you see particular matter, like, just coming up in the air? Like, how are you driving? How many donuts are you doing with your Honda Civic? Some of the particles are large enough to see with our eyes. Others are fine particles, known as PM 2.5, with diameters up to 2.5 microns, and ultra-fine particles, known as PM 0.1, with diameters of 100 nanometers, which can enter through our bloodstream and harm our organs. That's a trade-off I'm taking. If that's the case, you're saying my vehicle tires are hurting my organs? I'm taking that trade-off. Life's about trade-offs. You've got to take trade-offs every time you step out of the door. When you get in traffic in your vehicle, you run the risk of an accident. That's a trade-off I take. I want the liberty to get to and from work as I please in the direction I want to go. And not just work, wherever I want to go. If I want to jump in the car, I want to go somewhere, I can do that. Will there be risks involved? Yes, there will be. I'll take the fine particles in the bloodstream to travel. Scientists say the issue is only going to grow worse as more cars, including, are you ready for this part? This is an amazing feature of this article. It'll only grow worse as more cars, including heavier electric cars that put more strain on tires, are put on the road. Unlike tailpipe emissions, brake and tire emissions are not regulated, which suggests the pollution may continue unchecked for the foreseeable future. Okay, so what is the average weight of a Honda Accord? Let's say that's an internal combustion engine. Let's look at that. The average weight of a Honda Accord. The average curb weight of a Honda Accord is 3,313 pounds. CVT, what is the CVT trim? Somewhere around 3,000 pounds, they say. All right, so what does an average Tesla weigh? Let's see. An average Tesla weighs nearly 5,000 pounds, 4,600 pounds. The Tesla Model S long range. The Tesla Model X Model X, that's the SUV, long range, weighs about 5,185 pounds. So we're getting up to 5,000 pounds. So you're looking at 150% of the weight of the internal combustion engine sedan. That's a heavy vehicle. What does that weight do? If everybody transfers over to electric cars, and the reason they're so heavy is because the battery is essentially the full size of the car. It's the full bottom plate of the vehicle is the battery. So what does that do if we mandate electric cars on our roadways? How much more quickly do our roads deteriorate if all of the weight that's traveling on them goes up by 50, 60, 100% for every vehicle? What does that do to a road? That seems like a problem, doesn't it? Could be an issue. It could be we have many more infrastructure problems on the way. Also, if we're getting more pollution because of tires and brakes, why would we want to put heavier vehicles on the road that create a lot more friction between those tires and the earth? Why would we want to put more heavier vehicles on the road that wear through their brakes more quickly because it takes a lot more force to slow down a heavier vehicle moving at speed? Does this all make sense? So now we're being told, this is kind of an amazing story. And I realize this is just a part of the ongoing climate panic that we're constantly enduring. But now we're being told by the Washington Post today, you know what is actually producing the most pollution? Electric vehicles. Electric cars are creating more pollution than internal combustion engines because it turns out your tailpipe is pretty clean, but your tires and your brakes aren't. And the electric vehicles are heavier. Can you follow any of this? There's a lot that this changes moment by moment. There's a new rule. Electric vehicles are polluting too much. It's pretty amazing. Of course, you know what the end game of all of this is. It's stay in your home, don't go anywhere, and if you do go somewhere, it'll be on government-endorsed transportation where we can more easily track you and maintain the directions you're headed, rather than let you have your liberty and head all over the place. No more pumpkin picking for you. That's over now, thanks to Joe Biden and company. It's 421. After they're done going after your engine, they're going to go after your tires and your brakes. You're not allowed to use those things anymore. Pretty soon forget it. Not pretty soon. They're already doing this. But openly saying, you know what the real problem is? Humans. This is one of the kind of like benchmarks of the left, like the way that they talk about this, every so often they circle back to this like Malthusian view of like, we need to like have fewer humans. We need to remove them. Abort more children. It's the only way out. And it's dreadful, and it's actually totally evil. But then they create these problems, the government, and then they claim that they're the only ones who can solve it. Thanks a lot for that. Here's Matthew in California. He's calling in on line 1. Matthew, all the way on the West Coast. Good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
VC and DC, what's going on, dude?
Hey, Matthew, what's on your mind?
Well, my thoughts is I live up in the hills. I live up at about 5,000 feet, and I can now see the mountains way off where 10, 15 years ago you couldn't because of the smog. Now you can totally see the mountain. I mean, I live up at elevation, but you can see the snow-capped mountains, and there is snow in San Diego year-round, which a lot of people don't know.
Up there in the mountains.
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. And there's more snow now than ever.
Well, how about that? So how long have you lived in California, Matthew?
Oh, good gosh. I wasn't born in California, but I've lived in California almost all my life. I was born in Virginia, but lived in California almost all my life.
How about it? And so you say over the last 15 years in particular, it's become easier and easier to see at some distance because there's less smog these days.
And the funny thing is, the weather's perfect here. We've got everything you could imagine.
It's a beautiful state.
But you know what the biggest industry here is now? Is moving people out.
Yeah.
People are moving to Texas, Missouri, Florida. Who knows? Why would you move out of California? You'd have to be nuts, but they do.
Well, you don't have to be that nuts. I mean, the state is being run into the ground by the Democrats in charge of it. That seems like a logical explanation for why people are fleeing it. Also, the crime issues that exist in some of those major metropolitan areas seem like a problem, Matthew. But you're out, and it sounds like in a beautiful place, and wouldn't want to leave from it.
I know, but I have a house in the Mission District in San Francisco, and I love that city. That is my city. That's like when they call it the city, that's the city. But it's depressing. I got to be honest with you. It's depressing. I mean, nobody messes with me, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was waiting for you to finish that thought. But so nobody messes with you in San Francisco.
Nobody messes with me, but it's a shame to see it's like the whole city's turned into the Tenderloin, where we used to, walk kids around and, go out and have nice dinners.
Yeah.
And the best oysters in the world.
And what does it look like now?
Well, good gosh, it looks like an unkempt apartment in Manassas.
Yes, with a little bit of extra poop and some extra needles. Matthew, thank you. I think we figured out there are nice sections of California still, but there are more than a few good reasons to leave. That's for sure. It's 4:29. Good afternoon to you. 4:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Where we're making sense of the news. Senator Ron Johnson will join us coming up at 5:30. You can join us, as always, at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yep, electric vehicles. They keep shoving them down our throats, and they also keep shoving them down the throats of the American military. Is that going to be good for us? Colin Anderson has been digging in on this. He's a staff writer for the Washington Free Beacon, out with a new piece this week, headlined Military Efficiency, Biden's electric vehicle push adds hours to routine Marine trip. Colin, good to talk to you today, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, this is an area that I'm familiar with. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I spent many years there, lived there as a Marine Corps brat. What is going on in North Carolina with these electric vehicles?
Oh, look, we're talking about a base here that is in southwest Georgia, and they're a bit ahead of the curve when it comes to this EV adoption. This is something that the Biden administration has sort of flirted with plans on for quite a while. It started way back in 2021. Biden's deputy defense secretary said that they would have plans for tactical vehicles to go hybrid and then electric, think, Humvees and things of this nature. But that in the shorter term, non-tactical cars and trucks could go electric right away. And so this base that we covered in Georgia sort of took matters into their own hands a bit and decided that they were going to adopt an electric vehicle fleet pretty early on. They're a bit ahead of the curve on this. The problem is that even when you're talking non-tactical vehicles, there are all sorts of extended trips that our servicemen and women need to make in order to carry out their day-to-day mission. And in this case, Marines from the base often travel to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, which you mentioned. And this is a trip. It's 520 miles. It's not a short trip by any means, but you can do it on one tank of gas and a new Ford F-150 if you get the conventional engine. This base did not. They got the Ford F-150 Lightning, Ford's electric model. You cannot make this trip on one electric battery charge. In fact, you need 3. What that means is that you have to stop at least twice to make this trip from one base to the next, which they make regularly. And the biggest problem with that is that there is very, very little effective public charging infrastructure. So if you're a Marine making this drive from Georgia to North Carolina, you're stopping in Walmart parking lots and gas station parking lots to charge your electric F-150 just like anyone would. And in doing so, you're taking at the very least an hour and a half per charge is what we found charting out this trip. And by the way, that's assuming that these charging stations actually work. And if you look at reviews and these sorts of community websites where folks who go and charge their EVs at these ports, they leave reviews, they tell you all the time, they hardly ever charge at full speed. There's often long lines. They usually do not work at all. And so we're talking about, at the very least, adding 3 hours both ways to what should and has always been a very routine trip from one base to another. And again, it can be an all-day affair if you have the sorts of charging issues that electric vehicle users have every day on long road trips such as this. It doesn't seem to be stopping the Biden administration from moving forward, though, with, again, all sorts of plans to adopt EVs into the military.
So the Marines have to stop on their way from Albany, Georgia to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. They have to stop twice to recharge, and this adds how many hours of time to that trip?
It adds at least 3 hours to the trip. And when we reached out to the base and asked, they actually confirmed. They said that they have not taken the electric truck on this trip yet, but they have also charted out the amount of time that it would add, as we did. And they say that it would add 3 hours of charge time, which is the same conclusion that we came to. But again, this is essentially assuming that everything goes as smoothly as possible. And the problem is, when we looked into the specific charging stations, again, these are public stations in Walmart parking lots and gas station parking lots and things of this nature. You have users of these specific charging stations that note that they almost never worked as advertised in terms of charging speeds and things of that nature. So if you read one, they say that the specific charging station that is on this route from the military base in Georgia to Camp Lejeune, one reviewer that we quote in this piece called it straight trash. Another said that it was so pathetic that it could kill EV adoption because it is that slow and difficult to charge at these stations that no one in their right mind would want to do it. And again, this is what we're expecting from our Marines trying to carry out, a logistical mission here.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, an entry-level F-150 that has an internal combustion engine is way cheaper than an F-150 Lightning. Isn't that right?
Yeah, you're certainly correct about that. It's been a big hurdle for the general public looking to adopt electric vehicles. In general, they're about $10,000 more on average. The F-150 Lightning itself, the base model, where you're talking the lowest range in terms of battery life, is about $60,000. If you want to extend that range, you can run all the way up to $100,000 for this truck.
Right, and I've heard some reviews of this truck. It's not all it's cracked up to be. There was a lot of excitement about this, the electric truck, back when they announced it. I know it's got all sorts of ports on the back of it. You can plug in all your tools and things. But I've seen some real kind of negative reviews of this truck ever since its release, and now the Marines are adopting it as a means to get troops around?
They are, and yeah, there was quite a bit of hype back in 2021 at its release. Joe Biden drove it at a Ford factory in Michigan, and he had some very serious reactions to his driving. He called it, quote, a big boy, which was quite an interesting review. He also said that it was quick. And by all accounts, it is the 0 to 60 seems to be quite fast. It is a rather large truck, as the president described. The main problem here is, of course, battery range, and what that means getting from point A to point B. It's particularly an issue on the highway. The battery life in general for this truck, and often electric cars in general, when you're driving highway, it does not live up to the advertised battery range, which is, of course, a big problem for road trips such as this one. But again, the plan here is that both tactical and non-tactical vehicles will at the very least become hybrid and or electric in the coming future, which is, to me, and we quoted some folks in the piece that you mentioned saying as much as well. If we're talking about issues with public charging stations on, American highways from Georgia to North Carolina, I'm not quite sure what the infrastructure is going to be like in, say, Afghanistan.
Non-existent is the answer to that. And so, we're hamstringing the American military when we should be giving them the most efficient and safe vehicles ever in order to conduct their very lethal and needed missions.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops going forward, because we've had sort of reiterations from the Biden administration really in the last number of weeks that they continue to support this effort. Jennifer Granholm, Biden's energy secretary, was asked about this in a Senate hearing just back in April, and said she supports the adoption of what she called an EV fleet. And again, the administration's made very clear that we're not just talking about the non-tactical vehicles, cars and trucks stationed domestically like we're talking about today, which is plenty of an issue, but they're talking about Humvees.
It's kind of weird. One of the features of the military you hear a lot of active duty guys, veterans complain about is you get in the military and you're using a lot of old equipment, staying in old barracks. The building hasn't been renovated in 1,000 years. It smells weird. The base housing's awful. There's bugs everywhere. But the cutting edge stuff is the electric cars that don't work.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's one of those things where you see this speculation, decades and decades ago of what we will achieve by 2023, and perhaps we will see flying cars and revolutions beyond our wildest imaginations. And as it turns out, it's as if much of our developments in modern technology have been to making things more energy efficient, more climate friendly, and things of this nature, as opposed to better and more functional.
Do you get the impression that the Biden administration and the left broadly on this issue has a special obsession with forcing the military into compliance on its agenda?
Well, I think often what they talk about is the idea that, the federal government is this large emitter. They talk about it all the time, for example, when they put out orders to sort of clean up the carbon emission scene in federal buildings. And so it's sort of the same thing here. When you think of the military, if you're a climate-focused person, of which there are many in the Biden administration, of course, you think about not necessarily efficiency and lethality and combat readiness and things of this nature, but really what you see is a gigantic footprint, a gigantic carbon footprint. And so if that is the sole issue that you're viewing, the military and the federal government through, then of course the U.S. military is going to be a massive target in your mind, because if you're talking about carbon footprint, it's as big as it gets in the government. So I think for someone who is thinking of issues solely through a climate lens, it's impossible not to look through the military. I think obviously the argument would be that they should not be looking at the military through a climate lens.
At what point do they start assessing the carbon footprint of bullets? Do we move to electric bullets, or do we use the old ones with the gunpowder in them?
Well, it's a very good question, in the sense that there are all sorts of things that are being raised that we're not entirely sure, or certainly would not think of carbon emissions in the past, that now all of a sudden we're being warned with dire and very serious concerns.
Yeah.
That actually the sorts of things we use in the day-to-day are destroying the environment. I've read of this when it comes to tequila and mezcal, if you're into that sort of thing. I've even read this morning in the Washington Post that actually your tires are spewing pollution. And so we need to think of how to use other kinds of rubbers and things of this nature.
Yes.
To change our tires. So it's not just that you need to change your engine, you need to change your tires too. And oh, by the way, if you do change your engine, the electric vehicles are heavier, and that's going to cause more tire tread, and that kills the environment in and of itself. So I'm not really sure what isn't on the table in terms of the carbon footprint at this point.
Yeah, you got to lock yourself in your house. That's the only solution here. Colin Anderson, thank you. Or actually, the real solution is to fight for liberty. Thank you for doing that. Washington Free Beacons, Colin Anderson. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great to chat with you today. So there you go. So it's not just the civilians, it's the military, it's the poor Marines who have to travel from Albany, Georgia to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, who are told, hey, take the F-150 Lightning. Well, you're going to make the trip 3 hours longer because I'm going to have to stop and charge, and the charging stations may not actually work. Just shut up and do it, Marine. 3 extra hours. Wow. Let's take a call here. Jackie calling in from Poolsville, line 5. Jackie, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, Vince. Quick question. If these electric vehicles are so great for military operations, why aren't they sending them to Ukraine?
You know, this is a fantastic question. Why isn't Ukraine receiving our most cutting-edge vehicles, the electric vehicles, to let them drive all over Ukraine and Kyiv and everywhere? Yeah, this is a good point. You know, it's funny. It seems to me that we'd rather send them the good stuff, and then we keep the crappy stuff back here, like the electric cars, Jackie, unfortunately.
Yep, that's it.
All right, thank you, Jackie. It's a smart point. Let's see. Michael calling in from Springfield here, line 4. Michael, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate what you're talking about today. I love that you had Colin on today as well. It goes right to my point. With everything that's going on, it's like I've never been excited about electric cars and never understood why there's such the big push. And I've always been, why aren't we pushing with all these problems? For example, the hydrogen cars that like Toyota and them have been making out of California. Because my whole point is like, and I know the answer, it's because they don't want to talk about nuclear power because we have the resource through nuclear to power the hydrogen cars since it's a byproduct. And I don't understand why such a big push for electric, but we can't talk about hydrogen.
Well,
and oh, by the way, you're not going to see hydrogen do what electric do what they're going to do because Toyota and Honda apparently are going to put a hydrogen car in Le Mans starting in 2026.
You know, that sounds really cool to me. And I'm not picky at all on the fuel source for the vehicle itself. But what I am suspicious of and picky about is when our leaders tell us that we need to move to electric cars, and then we're not going to use the most prolific energy creator, nuclear, in order to charge them. There's something going on there, isn't there, Michael? When they tell you jump into an electric vehicle, but they won't allow new nuclear power plants to go online to sustain the grid to support all of the people who are going to need to tap into it. It's a scam.
I completely agree with you exactly on that point.
Yeah, it's too much. Michael, thank you. Yeah, look, detecting the obvious, which is getting harder and harder to detect with the lick spittle media, just sucking up to the electric car companies and sucking up to the left. I do have to say one wrinkle on the left's plans in electric cars that has me really amused is that they hate Elon Musk right now. That's one of the best parts of all of this. I thought you were on our side. And they're mad at him because he's allowing free speech. You know, they could just keep him in their corner if they weren't such lunatics about controlling everybody's speech, but that's the higher priority. Electric cars come second behind controlling what you think. It's 4:50 now. Let us take another call. We've got Mike calling in from Locust Grove, Virginia. That's on line 3. Hello, Mike. Good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. How you doing?
I'm good, sir.
Hey, I'm kind of baffled that we keep talking about all this going electric and doing this. Well, the guy sleeping in the White House presently has shut down everything in his, oil, coal, couldn't be any clearer. And he's shoving all the electric, all the wind power, all the solar down our throats. Who produces all that? China. And now it's shoving all our vehicles into electric and batteries. Who produces the batteries? China.
Yes.
and they're going to control everything.
Yeah. 10% for the big guys really paying off, isn't it, Mike?
But that's what's scary. I mean, you guys, you're doing a phenomenal job. I mean, everybody, you hear it all the time, but we never see any action as far as not that you could. That's what's the most frustrating, because we all know what's going on.
Yes.
How the hell do you stop it?
Yeah. These are great questions, Mike. Yeah, no, and look at what China's doing in the midst of all of this. The Chinese government keeps announcing export controls on all of the things that this green energy industry in the United States needs. In other words, they're now making things more expensive, and that means more American money is going to go to China in order to help generate our so-called green industry. Last week, Chinese announced export controls on 2 different metals that are used in computer chips and solar panels. There's conversations now about announcing export controls on lithium and cobalt. You know what those are used for? That's right, those batteries, those electric cars, those electric batteries. China has us over the barrel, and now they're just torturing us for fun. Janet Yellen going over there this weekend and bowing like a loser over and over and over. I've got a lot more for you coming up. We'll talk about this crazy American left and what they're up to. It's remarkable. And Joe, you know he has 7 grandchildren? The media is now debating whether or not he should admit it because there's a lot of bad people out there.